When my daughter spat the words, "You either serve my husband or get out of our house," it was as if the floor dropped out from under me. For a moment, the air in the room turned razor sharp. My ears rang not from volume, but from the sheer audacity. My own flesh and blood, standing there with her arms folded, eyes hard and cold, talking to me like I was a servant she could dismiss. I didn't shout back. My voice didn't crack. But something inside me roared. My hands tightened into fists at my sides, the heat rising so quickly it felt like my pulse was in my throat. Jason sat there with that smug little smirk, like he'd been waiting for this moment, like he was silently congratulating himself for finally pushing me over some invisible edge. But instead of exploding, I smiled. Not a warm smile, not forgiveness. The kind of smile that says, "You've just made the biggest mistake of your life." I turned and walked down the hall, my steps slow and deliberate. Every nerve in me screamed to turn around and demand an apology, to remind them whose roof they were under. But I knew better. I had learned that some battles aren't worth fighting in their chosen arena. The closet door creaked as I reached for the old leather suitcase on the top shelf. I'd bought it 40 years ago for my honeymoon with Linda, when love and hope filled every breath. My fingers traced the worn handle, and I caught the faint scent of cedar. That suitcase had carried dreams once. Now, it would carry my exit. "Dad, are you serious?" Emily's voice sliced through the hall sharper now, with just a hint of uncertainty. Behind her, Jason muttered something low, probably another cheap jab he didn't have the courage to say louder. Coward. I didn't dignify either of them with an answer. My hands moved with cold precision, folding shirts, sliding socks into the side pocket, tucking in the small framed photo of Linda from my nightstand. Each motion was fueled by something far stronger than fear. When I emerged, suitcase in hand, Jason leaned back on the couch, his smirk even wider. "So you're choosing the hard way?" I locked eyes with him, my voice steady but carrying the weight of a storm. "Number, I'm choosing my way." Oh. The front door swung open, and the crisp Oregon afternoon hit my face. The pine-scented air felt cleaner than anything inside that house. Cedar Falls stretched out before me, quiet streets, cold sunlight, and freedom just beyond the next corner. They thought they'd cornered me. They thought I'd leave defeated. They had no idea I'd just started the kind of plan that would leave them on their knees. If this story touched your heart, press 1 inch the comments. If you think it could have been handled differently, press 2. And I'd love to know, where in the world are you listening from? Cedar Falls, Oregon, wasn't the kind of place where you could keep your humiliation quiet, especially when that humiliation came from your own flesh and blood. With barely 3,000 people scattered between the pines, gossip here didn't just travel, it exploded. Folks knew who traded in their old truck before the ink dried on the loan. They knew who was sleeping on the couch before the spouse even threw the first plate. I'd lived here my whole life. 35 years at the local bank, the kind of job where I knew every name, every account number, every story behind each deposit slip. I raised my daughter, Emily, in the little craftsman house on Alder Street passed down from my parents. It was where Linda and I spent 2 decades building a life before cancer tore her from me. Never, never did I imagine I'd one day be walking out of that same front door, suitcase in hand, because my daughter and her freeloading husband had decided my worth could be boiled down to whether I served him or not. Emily had been bright from the start, sharp, headstrong, determined. I bent over backwards to give her every opportunity. When she turned her nose up at the perfectly good state university and demanded a private college with a $150,000 tuition, I paid it in full. When she wanted a wedding fit for a magazine spread, I covered the $25,000 tab, because no daughter of mine was going to be embarrassed on her big day. 3 years ago, when she and Jason wanted a house but couldn't get a decent mortgage, I yanked $80,000 from my retirement account for the down payment. Then I picked up the monthly mortgage, the car insurance, the utilities hell, even their grocery bills when money was tight. I told myself this was love, that Linda would have wanted me to help them, that one day, when I needed a hand, they'd stand beside me. But Jason was the kind of man who took kindness as a down payment on control. 30 years old, broad-shouldered, with a smirk that belonged in a mugshot. He drifted from job to job, always armed with excuses. The boss was a jerk, the hours too long, the pay too low. Yet somehow, he found the energy to plant himself in my living room and give orders like he owned the place. Emily didn't just ignore it, she defended him. She called it keeping the peace when I bit my tongue after he disrespected me in my own home. Over time, those little compromises piled up until peace had a new definition. I worked, they benefited, and I stayed quiet. The day of the ultimatum wasn't new in cruelty, but it was new in betrayal. Jason barked it, Emily stood beside him, and together they looked me dead in the eye. Serve him or get out. That was the moment something in me snapped, not with noise, but with clarity. I saw the years of financial support for what they were, the fuel for their belief that my dignity was something they could repossess. So I walked out, through the front door of the home my parents built, into streets lined with whispering pines and sharper whispers from cafe booths. I knew by sundown the whole town would know I was gone. What they wouldn't know, not yet, was that this wasn't a retreat. This was the first move in a fight they'd never see coming. It started on a Saturday afternoon, one of those rare early spring days in Cedar Falls where the sunlight pours through the curtains like molten gold, turning the dust motes into little flecks of peace. The kind of day you'd expect to feel safe in your own home. I had just returned from the market, 2 heavy paper grocery bags cutting deep grooves into my palms. The scent of fresh bread, still warm from the bakery, wrapped around me, the carton of milk dripping condensation against my wrist. It should have been an ordinary, quiet moment. Instead, I stepped into my living room and walked straight into an insult. Jason was sprawled in my leather recliner, the one Linda had given me for our 25th anniversary. His socks were off, his feet planted where my head usually rested, and a half-empty beer dangled from his fingers like a trophy. The remote control sat on his belly as if it belonged there permanently. He didn't even bother to look at me. "Hey, grab me another beer while you're up." I set the groceries on the counter, rubbing the red welts from the bag handles. "Jason, I just walked in. Let me put these away first." His eyes never left the basketball game. Corona. Not that cheap stuff you drink. My jaw locked. Those Coronas, every last one, were paid for with my Social Security check. I didn't drink them. They were for him. "Jason," I said, each word clipped, "you're a grown man. If you want a beer, you can get it yourself." That got his attention. He swung his legs down with a loud thud and rose to his full height, closing the distance between us. "Look, David, we can do this the easy way or the hard way. You live in our house, you contribute. That means when I tell you to do something, you do it. No questions. No attitude. Our house." The words hit like a slap. I let out a sharp, humorless laugh. "With my money." The kitchen door creaked, and Emily stepped in, drying her hands on a dish towel. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a loose ponytail, and for a second I saw the little girl who used to braid my hair with ribbons on Saturday mornings. Then she looked at me the way strangers look at someone causing a scene in public, cold, embarrassed, like I was the problem. "What's going on?" she asked. "Your dad's being difficult," Jason said without glancing at her. "I asked him to grab me a beer, and he's making it into a federal case." Emily's frown deepened, but at me, not him. "Dad, just get him the beer. It's not worth fighting over." Jason stepped closer. I could smell the alcohol on his breath, thick and sour. "See, here's how it's going to work. You live here, you follow my rules. No questions." Emily moved beside him, folding her arms. Her stance said unity, her eyes said pick a side. "Dad, you need to decide right now. Either you help Jason and do what he asks, or you can pack your things and leave." It was the kind of moment that should have felt surreal, like surely I'd misheard. Surely my daughter hadn't just sided with this man over me in my own home. But there it was. The air felt colder. The sunlight through the curtains seemed meaner somehow. "All right," I said softly. Jason's smirk widened. "Good. Now, about that beer." "I'll pack." The smirk slid right off his face. Emily's mouth fell open. They had expected me to bend, to mutter an apology and shuffle to the kitchen like a beaten dog. I walked past them without a word, into my bedroom. The suitcase came down from the closet shelf with a muffled thump. Not everything went in, just enough. Shirts folded sharp. Socks in the corners. My medications zipped away. Linda's photo wrapped in tissue, placed like a treasure at the top. From the living room came muffled whispers, the sound of 2 people realizing their bluff had been called. When I rolled the suitcase down the hallway, they froze. Jason was no longer lounging. He sat forward now, eyes alert. Emily leaned against the kitchen doorframe, arms still crossed, but her gaze wavered. Neither said goodbye. I stepped into the brisk air. the scent of pine cutting through the last of the stale tension, and loaded the suitcase into my Buick. The engine turned over instantly. I didn't look back. The drive to Cedar Pines Lodge was 30 minutes, a long enough stretch for my anger to simmer down to something sharper. The motel was nothing glamorous, a row of chipped paint rooms under a flickering neon sign that alternated between cedar pines and pines. My room was small but clean. A bed, a chair, a table by the window. It wasn't home, but it was mine. I sat on the bed, the springs groaning under me. For the first time in years, there was no television blaring through the walls, no footsteps pounding the hallway, no barked orders from a man half my age. The silence felt enormous, and inside that silence, something dangerous began to take root. I wasn't retreating, I was regrouping, and when I moved again, it would be checkmate. The first 2 nights at Cedar Pines Lodge were quiet in a way I hadn't tasted in years, quiet so thick it felt almost medicinal. I fell asleep to the low hum of the mini-fridge, instead of the drone of Jason's late-night sports channels shaking the walls. In the mornings, I drank my coffee in the motel lobby, where the clerk, an older woman with kind eyes, kept a pot brewing for the handful of guests who wandered in and out. By Monday, the stillness had started to clear my head. I decided to take a walk into town. Cedar Falls was small enough to cross in 20 minutes, but I let my steps stretch slow, pausing at shop windows, feeling the spring air scrape away the stale taste of Alder Street. I ducked into the Main Street diner for breakfast, sliding into a booth by the window. I had just picked up my menu when a voice I hadn't heard in years rang out. "David Harper. I'll be damned." I looked up. Mark Reynolds' sharp suit, even in retirement, the kind of man who could still tell you the interest rate trends for the last decade without looking at a chart. We'd worked together for 20 years at the bank. He slid into the booth across from me, a folded newspaper under his arm. "Haven't seen you since Linda's service," he said, his tone softening just enough for the memory. "Heard you've been living on Alder Street with your daughter." "Not anymore," I said evenly. Mark took a slow sip of coffee, studying me over the rim of his cup. "Then maybe you don't know about the little stunt your son-in-law tried to pull." The fork in my hand paused midair. "What stunt?" Mark leaned in. "About 3 months ago, Jason came into the bank with paperwork claiming he owned your house. Wanted a $50,000 home equity loan. I handled the application myself. Looked clean until I ran the title search. Everything was still in your name. No co-signers, no transfers. He'd forged it. The words hit like a sledgehammer to the chest. So it was deliberate. Mark nodded once, slow and deliberate. Fraud, plain and simple. I kept copies, figured you might need them someday. That was the first time since leaving Alder Street that my anger turned razor sharp. Not the hot, shouting kind, the cold, focused kind, the kind that makes every detail burn into your memory. That afternoon, I went straight to the police station. Detective Alan Brooks's office was at the back, just as it had been years ago. He looked older, more lines at the eyes, more gray at the temples, but the gaze was as keen as ever. "What brings you in, David?" I laid it out. The ultimatum, my exit, the forged loan attempt. Brooks listened without interrupting, pen tapping the edge of his notepad. When I finished, he exhaled. "Your son-in-law is a regular at Silver Creek Casino. Poker tables, mostly. Word is he's sitting on somewhere between 18 and 20 grand in debt to a mix of legitimate lenders and the kind of guys who don't send polite reminders." The puzzle pieces locked into place. Jason's arrogance, his obsession with control, his push to redefine my house as ours. It wasn't just ego, it was leverage, or at least his pathetic attempt at it. Brooks leaned forward. "If I were you, I'd keep my distance. A man in his position, he might do something stupid to keep the money coming." I left the station with my mind stripped clean of doubt. This wasn't just a family squabble. It was an ongoing robbery, one I'd been financing with a smile, because I thought it was love. Back at the motel, I opened my laptop and started a file. Evidence. Lawson. Entry 1. Attempted home equity loan fraud. $50,000. Copies with M. Reynolds. Entry 2. Gambling debt. $18,000, $20,000, confirmed by debt. Brooks. It wouldn't stop there. By the time the sun went down, I had a plan. Step 1. File an eviction notice through the courthouse. Step 2. Cut every financial tie mortgage. Insurance, credit cards, effective immediately. Step 3. Let every creditor Jason owed know in writing that he had no legal claim to my home or my assets. The ultimatum they'd shoved in my face had been short and ugly. Mine would be shorter still. You wanted me out. Now you're out of my money, my house, and my protection. It didn't take long for the ripples to crash back on shore faster than even I expected. 2 days after my calls to Jason's creditors, Cedar Falls was already buzzing like a hornet's nest. The first sting came from Tom Rivers over at the hardware store. "David, I think you ought to know," he said, his voice careful. "Jason was in here this morning, telling anyone who'd listen you've lost your mind. Claims you threw him and Emily out over some petty squabble. Says you promised to take care of them for life and then just snapped." I could almost hear Jason's oily tone in Tom's retelling, spinning his little pity play for anyone gullible enough to listen. I didn't even have to ask who believed him. It sure as hell wasn't the people who mattered. "Let him talk," I said flatly. "Every word he says digs the hole deeper." But Jason wasn't content to just poison the air with gossip. An hour later, my phone rang again, Detective Brooks. "Heads up, Jason just came in filing a complaint for elder abuse. Says you're being manipulated into making bad financial decisions." I laughed so hard Brooks had to pause. "By who?" He didn't say. And without any medical documentation of incompetence, there's nothing to pursue. But it's obvious he's trying to set a narrative before you set yours. Then came the most brazen move yet. That afternoon, Emily's number lit up my phone. I almost let it go to voicemail, but curiosity won. "Dad," she began, her voice dripping with tears, "there's something you don't understand. I'm pregnant. The stress from all this. The doctor says it's dangerous for the baby." I gripped the phone tighter. "When did you find out?" "Last week. Before everything fell apart. Please, can't we just fix this?" "Which doctor?" I asked. A pause. "Dr. Matthews. But you don't need to call." "If there's a medical emergency involving my grandchild, I will help," I said evenly. "But I'll confirm it with the doctor directly." Her tone turned sharp in an instant. "You can't just—" "I can and I will." The click of the line going dead was answer enough. That evening there was a knock at my motel door. Steve Carter, the night manager at Cedar Pines, stood there with his jaw set. "Mr. Harper, your son-in-law was here. Stood outside your room for 5 minutes before leaving. Made some guests nervous. I've got it on the security cameras if you want it." "Save it," I told him. "Detective Brooks will want to see it." By the next morning, I was at the station with a USB drive in one hand and a detailed timeline in the other. Public confrontations, threats, now trespassing. Brooks scanned the evidence and didn't hesitate. "David, this is enough for a restraining order. 500 feet, anywhere, anytime. He violates it. He's in cuffs." By that afternoon, a judge had signed it. The paper was ready for service. It should have been the end. But with Jason, the end was never the end. It was just the next beginning. Marcus Webb from Frontier Financial called later. "Mr. Harper, thanks for confirming Jason's address. He's 3 months late on an $8,000 account. We'll be sending collectors to his residence." "Good," I said without an ounce of sympathy. "Make sure they know exactly whose debt it is." 2 hours later, Emily's number popped up again. "Dad, there are men at the house asking about Jason's debts. They're talking about garnishing wages." "What's going on?" "That's what happens when someone borrows money they can't pay back," I said. "Those are Jason's consequences, not mine." The silence on her end was thick. I could almost hear the realization drop. Jason's web of lies was snapping thread by thread. "He told me he was working overtime," she muttered. I didn't answer. Some truths were better left to echo. Outside my motel window, the neon Cedar Pines sign flickered against the coming night. Jason was boxed in debts pressing from all sides, his job teetering, his reputation bleeding out into the streets of Cedar Falls. And we hadn't even reached the part where I'd strike the final blow. By Wednesday morning, I was done playing polite games. No more half-truths. No more waiting for her to piece it together on her own. I called Emily. "Meet me at Annie's diner. Just you." "I can't leave Jason alone right now, Dad," she said, voice flat and defensive. "Then there's nothing to discuss. The restraining order means I can't be anywhere near him anyway." Silence. Then, grudgingly, "What time?" 2:00. Back booth. I got there 20 minutes early and chose the seat with my back to the street. I wanted her to see me first, not the other way around. When she walked in, the sight almost startled me. My daughter, only 28, carried herself like someone twice that age, shoulders hunched, eyes ringed with exhaustion, the bright spark she once had smothered under a haze of stress and bad choices. She slid into the booth across from me without a hello. "Dad, this has to stop. Jason lost his job, the phone won't stop ringing, and people keep showing up at the house asking for money." I let her unload it all, then said, "I'm offering you one chance to end this with some dignity." Her brow furrowed. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Public acknowledgement. Full disclosure of how I've supported you both, and an honest explanation of why I left." Her cheeks flushed with heat. "You want me to humiliate myself in front of everyone? I want you to tell the truth. There's a difference." She leaned forward. "Spell it out." Sunday morning. Testimony time at Cedar Falls Community Church. A signed letter to the editor in the Tribune, and a Facebook post for all our mutual friends. "You will state plainly that I paid your $150,000 college tuition, your $25,000 wedding, the $80,000 down payment on your house, and all your major living expenses for the past 3 years. You will tell them Jason gave me an ultimatum in my own home, and you stood by him." Her eyes darted away, staring into her coffee as if the dark surface might offer an escape route. "And if I can't? Then you live with the fallout. Jason will run, men like him always do when the pressure gets too close, and you can chase him across the wreckage, or you can start over here. But if you choose him, you choose losing me." Her voice wavered, but she tried to keep it level. "You're making me pick between my husband and my father." "No," I said. "I'm making you pick between a man who threatened me and the man who raised you." The words hung between us. She blinked hard, and tears gathered at the corners of her eyes. "And the house? It's already in my will to the Oregon Veterans Housing Initiative. 3 veteran families will live there. Even if you do everything I ask, that stays final. I need to know any reconciliation between us is because you want your father, not because you want his property." "Oh?" For the briefest second, she looked like the little girl who used to braid dandelions into crowns in the backyard, asking if I'd wear them. "Do you think you could ever forgive me?" "Forgiveness is given," I said quietly. "Trust is earned, one honest action at a time." She nodded once, wiped her eyes, and walked out without touching her coffee. Sunday morning came crisp and bright, the kind of clear air that makes every sound carry. The parking lot at Cedar Falls Community Church was fuller than I'd seen it in years. Word had gotten around small towns have a way of passing news faster than truth itself. People weren't here for the hymns. They were here for the Harper family story. I sat in my usual spot, 3 rows from the front, feeling eyes flick toward me as Pastor Williams led the service. When testimony time came, Emily rose from the back, her heels clicking against the hardwood aisle. At the podium, she gripped the sides so tightly her knuckles went bone white. "I need to tell you all something about my father," she began, her voice steady enough to reach every corner of the sanctuary. And then she laid it all out. The tuition, the wedding, the down payment, the years of mortgage, utilities, groceries, car insurance, all paid by me, out of my retirement. She admitted Jason had given me an ultimatum in my own home, and she had chosen his side. Her voice cracked. "I stood by while my husband disrespected the man who raised me. I chose loyalty to someone who threatened my father over loyalty to the man who has always loved and supported me. I was wrong. We were both wrong. I can't undo it, but I can tell the truth." The sanctuary erupted in murmurs. A few people nodded. Others shifted uncomfortably. Pastor Williams stepped forward, resting a hand on her shoulder. "The hardest kind of courage is owning your mistakes." As she made her way back down the aisle, she caught my eyes. For the first time in years, there was no defensiveness there, just something raw and unguarded. Regret. Maybe even the first glimmer of resolve. 3 months later, I stood in the front yard of what used to be my family home, watching a moving truck back carefully into the driveway. The place didn't even look like the same house. Fresh paint gleamed in the morning sun, new railings caught the light, and a sturdy wheelchair ramp ran up to the porch. Inside, the Oregon Veterans Housing Initiative had carved the old layout into 3 self-contained apartments, each with its own kitchen, bathroom, and a door that locked from the inside. It was no longer a battleground for my dignity. It was a sanctuary. Staff Sergeant Maria Santos, just home from deployment, stepped out of a van with her 2 kids. The moment they spotted the swing set in the yard, they bolted toward it, their laughter ringing across the lawn like wind chimes. Maria shook my hand with a grip that told me exactly how many battles she'd fought overseas and back home. "Mr. Harper, this means more than you know," she said. "We've been searching for a safe place to land. You've given us that." I smiled, the answer simple and certain. "This house should serve people who understand sacrifice. You've earned it." By the time the last box disappeared inside, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace that wasn't bought by compromise, silence, or submission. Peace that came without a price tag. My own home now sat on the quiet shore of Lake Cedarview, a two-bedroom cabin with a dock for my fishing boat, and mornings spent with coffee on the deck, watching mist lift off the water. No voices shouting from the next room. No stacks of unpaid bills with someone else's name at the top. Emily had kept her word. 2 weeks after her testimony at church, her letter ran in the Tribune, no hedging, no softening, just facts. Her Facebook post was equally blunt. She filed for divorce the day after Jason skipped town, and from what I heard, no one in Cedar Falls had seen him since. One bright Saturday morning, my phone buzzed with her name. 3 months into counseling. Learning a lot. "Coffee this week?" I looked out across the lake just in time to watch an osprey circle high above, then dive hard into the water. It rose with a fish clutched tight in its talons. I typed back, "Saturday morning, Annie's Diner." Her reply came fast. "I'll be there. Thanks for not giving up on me." I set the phone down and watched the osprey climb higher into the sky. Sometimes dignity means walking away. Sometimes it means keeping the door unlocked for the person who wronged you, knowing they can only step back through it if they've shed their lies at the threshold. For the first time in a long while, I believed my daughter just might